Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the June Urban and Community Forestry Society webinar. You notice it's a little bit different this week. Leslie is not with us this week, and instead we're going to be joined by Darren Green, who's going to give us a little bit of a welcome here. Darren is a landscape architect out of Alexandria, Louisiana. He's been a longtime urban education facilitator for the Municipal Forestry Institute. You guys may have seen him there. He's also a past president of the UCSF Board of Directors, and you may have seen him as a mystical woodland fairy distributing sweets at our last conference. And maybe if you come to the conference this year, you might see a glimpse of him again. So here he is, and his other wearing his other hat. So welcome, Darren. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Carla. I'm glad to be here today. So I thought I would just give you a little, for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, or maybe you've been involved peripherally, but not real deeply. So, I mean, who are we? What do we do? We are the boots on the ground folks who have anything to do with planting, caring for, managing, designing our urban forests, the assets, whether they be in cities, states, or in internationally. So kind of how do we do that? So I like to break things down into, what is your influence level? You may be someone who just drags limbs and puts them in the chipper. You may be a program manager in your entity. You may be the urban forester, or you could be someone like me, a landscape architect who gets more into the design side of it. And we have folks from all of those kind of levels of influence. And one of the things we say at MFI, which is our premier leadership training, is that you can lead from wherever you are, and you have influence from wherever you are. Where do we work? That's kind of a scale thing. We have folks who primarily governmental entities, federal, regional, state, county, or if you're lucky enough to be from Louisiana, you can work in a parish. Um, we have lots of people who work for cities, municipalities, but you also need to think about park districts and water districts and things like that, who those folks also dabble in urban forestry. The work settings that we have members from, primarily public sector, but not exclusively. We are getting a lot more people from the private sector who do consulting, academia, folks who teach, our future employees. And then more recently, we've welcomed a lot of nonprofit members, because in many places in the country, the nonprofits are the ones who are either by contract or by default are managing the urban forests, either through a partnership or doing it completely by themselves. So how do like what do we do for people? Well, we have the three C's. We have competence, confidence, and camaraderie. These webinars are all about competence. It's increasing your technical ability to do what you do in your job every day. The confidence is really enabling you to take that knowledge and take it out into to the public, to the people that we deal with every day, which is probably the hardest part of our job, right? We're all probably very good at what we do, but we're not as necessarily as good at dealing with people. Um, and then the last thing is the camaraderie. That's the support system of, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm a lone ranger. I'm the only person who does what I do in our city. Um, and so anyway, it's good to meet with other people who do the crazy stuff that we do and get support and learn things. So welcome to everybody. If you're not a member, please consider joining, getting involved, coming to our conference, get on a committee, join the board, come to MFI. It's a great group of people, and I'm going to kick it back to Carla.
Thanks so much, Darren. I just posted in the chat a link to our membership page on our website if you're interested in joining us. And I also, if you haven't seen it in the chat, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from. It's great to see so many people out there, lots of old friends. So welcome, everybody. I'm excited to introduce uh, Ryan Suttle, who's with us from Bartlett and Hort Science, Bartlett Consulting in Berkeley, California. Ryan focuses on tree risk assessment and tree preservation during development. We're really excited to showcase his work on dead, dying, and decaying trees that really provide an essential habitat for urban wildlife. And I also just want to mention that thank you to Bartlett, who is sponsoring our webinars, and so really appreciate their support and helping us put on these monthly webinars every month. So thank you, Ryan. I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to you. Are you with us, Ryan?
Yes, am I back?
Yep. Do you have a little
Okay.
virtual glitch there?
I think I had a little bit of lag there. Hopefully this kind of sorts itself out. I'll just turn off my camera to try to limit that, but I'll share my screen here
Great.
and get started.
Great.
Cool. All right, so yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited here to be talking about tree care, managing trees for wildlife in our urban cities. I think it's a topic that I see gaining a whole lot more traction these days. With constituents, with people who maybe don't even care about trees, they care about wildlife and the benefit that provides, that trees provide them, and as well as arborists here too. So to give a brief outline of what we'll go over today, I'll start with an introduction, kind of the context to this talk, and some industry discourse that I've been noticing. I'll briefly talk on the habitat value of trees, why they're so awesome for our urban wildlife. I'll talk about managing trees and landscapes for wildlife value, kind of what do we do about it and what's our role here as arborists and urban foresters, both at the individual tree level, kind of more the arboriculture side of it, and some opportunities that I see at the program level in urban forestry. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A and some lively discussion. So here we go, introduction. Again, my name is Ryan Suttle. I'm here representing Hort Science Bartlett Consulting today. I'm a consulting arborist and urban forester out of the San Francisco Bay Area in Oakland right now. I have my BCMA and RCA through ISA and ASCA and a master's in environmental conservation focusing in arboriculture and urban forestry from UMass Amherst, which is where I kind of started getting interested in this intersection between wildlife and environmental conservation and arboriculture. So as Carla mentioned, most of my work focuses on tree risk assessment and managing trees during construction. Wildlife is kind of one step removed from these industries, but I think quite related. A lot of things that are beneficial to wildlife may increase likelihood of failure, and balancing that risk versus benefit is a really important part of tree risk assessment and management that I hope to touch on today. And I see development, at least in my area, being the main pressure and source of loss of these big, cool wildlife trees like this one pictured here. So hopefully, we'll talk through some of these conflicts today and get some discussion on how this shows up in your work. So I also spend quite a bit of time volunteering for in an organization called Tree Care for Birds and Other Wildlife. It's a committee of our Western chapter ISA. And this was formed kind of in response to a wildlife emergency. You all may be familiar with this one. I think the better part of 10 years ago now, a large ficus tree was being pruned in downtown Oakland. Here's a picture of one of the trees on this block. There's about 6 of them during the breeding season. And as the crew was in the tree, baby herons were falling out of the tree, jumping out of their nest, trying to get away from the chainsaws and landing on the concrete and getting injured. Some residents walking by happened to be involved with the Audubon Society, now renamed the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. They called the city, put a stop to the work. Luckily, the birds were rescued and rehabilitated eventually, but this was a big deal. It was such a big deal that a federal investigation took place into this company. It was national news. It really caused a ruckus, and I think this is kind of how we mainly interact with the negative part of wildlife in our work. Pruning during the nesting season The baby birds can't get away. And I think in this scenario, the crews, I don't think could say they didn't know the birds were in the trees. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with black-crowned night herons or snowy egrets, but this individual tree here, I've been there in years since. It has dozens of nests in there. The babies are big, they're noisy, they smell bad. There's bird poop all over the ground here. There's no way that the crews didn't know that the birds were in the tree. What they didn't know was that it was probably a bad idea to be pruning it while the birds were there. And they might be violating some pretty important laws, at least in the US. Three main acts that deal with protection of birds are the Eagle Act, protecting bald eagles and golden eagles. It's very strict. They have high levels of protection, but it's only two species. Next, below on this pyramid, a little bit broader, is the Endangered Species Act, obviously protecting endangered species. This is around 2,500 species of wildlife, some birds, some other invertebrates, mammals, what have you, protecting the animals in their critical habitat. What I think we most often run into in urban forestry and arboriculture is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. It protects around 1,000 species of birds that migrate through the US, Canada, Mexico, and it's just native birds to the area. So there's a good chance that if you see a nest, it may belong to one of these birds protected by this act. Here's some text from this. So it prohibits the take, and take being defined as killing, capturing, selling, trading, and transport a protected migratory bird species without prior authorization of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Excuse me. So when doing tree care operations during the breeding season, there's a real possibility that we'll be running up against this and inadvertently taking these birds and causing harm. So in response to this, some cities proposed moratoriums of pruning during the breeding season. Here in the Bay Area is about February to August. And if that was enacted, it would decimate the tree care industry. No work could happen for around half the year. And that would just be disastrous to the industry that we worked in. So in response, Tree Care for Birds was formed. They met and discussed and wrote articles that ultimately resulted in this BMP. The Tree Care for Wildlife Best Management Practices BMP, shameless plug here, this is available for free online. It's a really good resource. As a broad overview, this BMP covers recommendations for determining habitat value of individual trees, as well as job sites, performing pre-work inspections, and figuring out the recommended level of training you might need to do this work, or when to involve a wildlife biologist if things are kind of over our heads. So this offers a lot of really practical guidance towards that. It also covers some atypical advice, approaches to managing dead, dying, and decaying trees in our landscapes and preserving the value that they deliver into the future. Tree Care for Birds also hosts annual trainings to train folks to be wildlife trained arborists. With air quotes, it's not an official accreditation or anything like that, but it is really valuable training. Here's a photo of a really fun one we did recently about creating snags in Colma, California. So standing dead trees is what I mean by snags here, and creating artificial cavities for wildlife use in those trees. So I'll next talk about broadly the habitat value of trees before I get into some management implications here. Obviously, trees provide food for all sorts of wildlife in urban areas, either directly through fruit, seeds, nuts, leaves, or the sap of the tree. But I think almost more interestingly is starting with decay organisms and moving up the trophic levels through these grubs, these beetles that are digesting this decayed wood, and the woodpeckers that feed on them. They're really entrenched in these complicated food webs in our urban ecosystem. And it doesn't end with just the trees. The tree litter, the leaf litter, fallen leaves adds a lot of foraging opportunities for birds, as well as invertebrates and things like that. Obviously, shelter is a big contribution. So this can be thought of kind of as temporary protection from predators, from people, from noise. And a lot of different birds here have specific preferences. So take this Pacific wren here on the left. This little cutie loves really dense underbrush. They're really difficult to see. They love twiggy undergrowth, whereas something like a great blue heron on the right would just be crashing through this. It wouldn't really offer any benefit to a heron, but maybe a big tree with open branching structure or something like a palm would be really valuable to them. So it's all species specific, and bird species really have strong preferences on what they need. What I will mainly be focusing on for the rest of this talk is nesting. So we have nests supported by the tree. So things like our cup nests here in the middle, resting on the branches, or platform nests belonging to eagles and things like that. There are also pendulous nests here. So things like orioles will build nests that hang off of the underside of palm fronds or the underside of branches. Equally as important are nests within the tree itself, either excavated by birds or in natural cavities that form either after a branch failure or maybe resulting from some of our work in pruning. So something like this valley oak here with these huge branch failures resulting in these cavities that are several feet across, they're excellent habitat for things like barn owls and other cavity nesting species. So let's talk a little bit about individual features of trees that are valuable to wildlife. This is a really cool illustration by Brian French. He's an arborist in the Portland area. Great arborist, great illustrator. I see a lot of these features talked about as defects in our industry. I tend to steer clear of the word defect when I can. I think it has a negative connotation. It implies that this is inherently bad and it can or should be fixed, even if it either doesn't need to be fixed or can't be fixed. So a lot of these features add more texture. They add more opportunities for food gathering, for nesting, for resting in the tree. Kind of the most importantly in this talk are dead branches and cavities in different parts of the tree, these habitat features. And how do these habitat features develop over time? So broadly speaking, old trees have a lot more of these features than younger trees do. This is another Brian French illustration showing the development of a Douglas fir going from year 10 to maybe 400 on this bottom horizontal axis, and a measurement of unitless habitat value on the vertical axis. So we can see that it's a nice tree from year 10 to 100, but the structure is kind of boring. There's not so much opportunities for cavities or really complex branching structure. In year 200, maybe the top has died back. There's more opportunities for cavities to be excavated in that dead part or naturally occur. We see some lower branches starting to assume apical control and form secondary stems here, really complicating that structure. And by year 400, you have this gnarled tree with all of these interesting branches, a lot of opportunities for birds and other wildlife to find their exact niche, their exact preference in this tree. In terms of structural complexity, the size and the abundance of cavities is quite a lot more diverse on this old big tree than on the younger trees that maybe are in good condition or better condition. That being said, in the Bay Area, I've certainly never seen a 400-year-old Douglas fir like this, but what I have seen are some big oaks, and this is kind of how I approach it in my work. Simply put, more tree is more wildlife benefit. These are two valley oaks that I've seen on my job sites. The one on the left is a perfectly nice tree. It's around 9 inches in diameter. It's growing well. It's pretty well structured, but it probably makes up 1% of this crown of this tree on the right. On the right is a 73-inch diameter valley oak. It's probably hundreds of years old, and it's enormous. It has really complex branching structure, a whole mess of cavities on these scaffold limbs, bryophytes. I mean, you name it. This is an incredibly valuable tree from a wildlife perspective. And as urbanization increases, I think we lose these trees from development pressure, from risk assessments that don't take creative approaches to managing risk. And that's what I want to focus on with the rest of this talk, is preserving these old trees with the valuable habitat features where we can. So as a roundabout way, working with trees, we are working with wildlife indirectly. So I'll now talk about managing trees and landscapes for wildlife value starting at the individual tree level. So where people or property are present, obviously trees can pose risks. Some elements that are more favorable to wildlife may also increase tree risk. So things like dead branches may be more likely to fail than live branches. Trees or branches with cavities may be more likely to fail than those without them. Obviously, when considering preserving dead or decaying trees, safety has to be the #1 consideration above wildlife value, but luckily we have many tools already in our industry to approach this. Starting with tree risk assessment, it's designed to assess trees in this way. So I'll talk about these 4 documents here about how they relate to risk in a second. But I'm going to give a broad overview first about how tree risk functions. This is obviously not a track class. Many of us on this call today have probably already taken the course, but you need 3 considerations to have meaningful tree risk. Likelihood of failure. How likely is a tree or a tree part to fail within a specified time frame? Likelihood of impacting the target, so assuming that tree or tree part has failed, how likely is it to hit something? And if it were to hit something, what would the consequences be, right? If you take any 3 of these issues away, say there's no likelihood of impacting a target, there's no meaningful targets around, risk is not really how I would be approaching the management decision of a dead or dying tree. It's just not that meaningful. So take this tree, for example. This is a dead Monterey pine in the Presidio in San Francisco. It's a really popular park. It has millions of visitors a year, and this dead tree has been preserved. The distance to the nearest target is greater than the height of the tree. I was tasked with assessing the risk of this tree, and my assessment was low risk, and my recommendation was to preserve the tree and monitor it over time because I thought this tree that has these scaffolds kind of reduced and preserved offers good perching habitat for birds. And while I was looking at this tree, wouldn't you know it, a little scrub jay landed right on the top. I think once you start noticing these trees in the landscape and just kind of slowing down and trying to see what's using them, often a bird or something will land on it within a couple of minutes. I mean, it's really astounding how important these things are to our urban wildlife. To talk a little bit more about risk, this is what I think kind of a theoretical risk curve is compared to the lifespan of a tree, right? We have a small young tree here on the left. It's unlikely to fail. If it were to fail, it might not hit anything. It's so small and the consequences wouldn't be so bad. As the tree grows in size, maybe the consequences and the likelihood of impact increase, but it's still unlikely to fail if it's in good condition. Once it starts developing these features like cavities or dead branches, cavities in the trunk or at the base, likelihood of failure may increase until it eventually dies and falls over. If we compare that to kind of how we value trees, and I mean we, in the royal we sense in certainly urban forestry in the US, generally value looks like this, where mature trees in good condition are our most valuable trees. That's what people are trying to promote in the landscape. And as the tree naturally senesces and enters old age and starts retrenching, likelihood of failure may increase, risk kind of increases, and this value curve lowers to below this theoretical risk curve. And that's represented by this vertical line where the value becomes lower than the risk. And this is where our really tough decisions have to be made of either risk reduction pruning or things like cabling or removal. And I think this is where we start losing a lot of these really big trees, these really interesting, cool trees that are valuable to wildlife before they've really achieved their most benefit from a wildlife perspective. I think if we were going to ask a bird to draw this curve, a very talented artistic bird might draw something like this, where the wildlife value increases even through old age, even through these senescent stages of life as the tree develops these cavities or dead branches or structural issues that may make them more likely to fail, but also make them more valuable wildlife habitat. And the wildlife value even continues after the tree is on the ground. All sorts of invertebrates and mammals and some birds really get a lot of value out of downed wood. So that's something that we can also encourage too. This intersection of the risk and value is pushed way, way out into the older stages of this tree. I don't know if this is maybe the best way to approach trees in our urban areas, but I think as arborists and urban foresters, we can benefit from maybe scooching our tolerance a little bit farther out to the right. And I think we have tools to approach this decision making process, starting with pruning. Our pruning BMP directly mentions this head on, right? So here's some text from it. If one of the objectives is to maintain or promote wildlife habitat, not all dead, decaying, dying branches should be removed. Easy as that. And it even takes it one step farther. In some cases, branches can be intentionally wounded to encourage decay or to create cavities intended for nesting. So not only can we preserve these features, we can go a step further and create these features where appropriate. And this is within our BMP, within our industry guiding materials, and can be a defensible way to manage these trees. This is also present in the ANSI standard. There's an example pruning objective. I think it's officially an attachment to the standard of managing wildlife habitat using tools like heading cuts, techniques like heading cuts, and preserving dead, decayed, and broken branches where acceptable risk is presented. So this brings in the idea of one, assessing the risk of these dead, decayed, broken parts, and managing that, comparing it to an acceptable risk threshold that you have come up with originally. So we don't yet have an industry document to guide risk management decisions, but luckily we do have one for risk assessment. And this document that was just updated in 2025 has some really cool new stuff in the text directly relating to this topic here. So this document, this new version, says that dead trees and dead branches retained for wildlife habitat can be assessed for risk like any other tree. A dead tree or a dead branch can perfectly defensively be assessed for likelihood of failure, likelihood of impact, and consequences. And a risk rating can be created for that. That might sound simple. I just don't see many people doing that for dead trees. There's not a whole lot of industry guidance on how to do that. I will do another plug here. My colleague Ryan Gilpin and I at Tree Care for Birds are working on an article to try to get this discussion started. So hopefully keep an eye out for that in the near future. How we approach this decision of assessing dead trees for risk. And this also gives other guidance that says selection of suitable habitat trees must consider the risk. So this is a really strong directive with the word must, as well as its value for wildlife. So it's a complicated decision to make. So here are some possible techniques that I've had some success with. Is preserving snags, and by snags I mean dead branches or whole dead trees. These may be preserved in groups or individual trees. Techniques like fracture pruning to do snags in living trees is a really neat technique. So the idea is when a branch removal cut would make too large of a wound at the trunk or at a scaffold branch or something like that, you would leave a stub with a heading cut and then use a chainsaw to mimic the texture of a naturally failed branch. This would keep the decay out of the important part of the tree for longer than a huge wound right at the trunk, for instance, and makes it more valuable for wildlife. I mean, the idea is to imitate the texture of something like this. Here's a red-tailed hawk that landed on a snag that I was looking at for tree risk. This is a photo I took through my binoculars. And the idea with these chainsaw cuts like this on the right is to increase the texture so that makes it possible for birds to actually get purchase on this with their feet. And it also allows for the entry of decay microorganisms into this piece of wood that starts this food chain off from the bottom up and actually makes it a valuable resource. We can also create artificial cavities. So like the pruning BMP mentioned, if you're really good with a chainsaw through a series of mostly plunge cuts, you can create a kind of an interior bird box in a tree. Now, this is definitely not something I would recommend for every tree. Maybe if it was a snag that you'd reduce the height of, or if it was a tree that was dead or dying not near a target, this would be great. There's also a tool called an arbor grub here on the left. I'm a little bit less familiar with this. It seems to be mostly out of Australia, but gaining a little bit of traction here in the PNW. Yeah, it's kind of a rotary blade that you can attach to what looks like an angle grinder sort of tool to create this cavity. I have less experience with that, but just wanted to throw that out there. And this is the goal, right? So look at this little cute chickadee using this feature that was made by an arborist. I mean, that's just got to feel so good to make this feature and then see the bird that you wanted to use it using it. So you can match up the height of this nesting box or the size of the opening to try to attract a specific bird. There's plenty of information about species preferences online. I really like the Cornell lab to be my source for that. But this is the goal, right? To create these features and to have them be used by wildlife in our landscapes. That being said, this all has to be paired, in my opinion, with tree risk assessment and monitoring. These pieces, these snags, are not going to get better over time. They're only going to become more likely to fail. And we have to plan for that. And we can. We have tools to plan for that. To that end, we ought to also plan for eventual removal or failure of these pieces. And when that happens, you can also consider leaving wood on the ground to continue that nutrient cycling and that wildlife contribution of these pieces. I find these techniques really effective when paired with signage, excuse me. So this provides an educational opportunity, a really good way to engage the community and get them excited about these practices. Um, People love birds, people love wildlife, especially when they have these cute little illustrations on the signs. It also communicates your intention to these people. So they're not going to walk by this tree and think, oh, my urban forester doesn't even know this dead tree is here, or walked by it and didn't think it was a problem. This communicates the intention that you've looked at this tree, you've assessed the risk of it, hopefully, and decided on a plan to preserve it to continue that benefit into the future. And it may prevent removal pressure from the public. It may at least, I would hope, prevent some annoying phone calls. All right, so at the risk of undercutting everything that I've talked about before, not every dead tree or dead branch should be a habitat snag. I'd argue that probably most of them don't need to be. We have to understand the habitat value of the snag itself. In general, bigger pieces with more structural diversity, so large and small diameter branching, are better than small pieces that are uniform. This also is influenced by the surrounding area. You can have the best looking snag in the world, but if it's in the middle of a paved, ocean-like parking lot, there's not going to be that many birds around to use it. And on the flip side of that coin, even a low value habitat snag like this one on the right, it's like a 3-foot stump, can be used if it's in a high value habitat area. So this one on the right, this was in the Presidio. What you don't see is behind me when I took this photo, there's a stand of old Monterey pines that are really, really good habitat. And the birds are flying from these pines over to this little tiny snag. Um, and you can see woodpecker activity on it. Another consideration is how many snags per unit area. There obviously has to be some point of diminishing returns where more snags is not really delivering more benefits. And we don't really know where that line is. There's some research that has been done on timber plantations looking at snag density, but I'm not totally certain on how to translate that to urban landscapes. If anybody's got any ideas, please let me know. And as if all of that was too simple, we also have to consider the aesthetic balance, right? Not everybody is going to want a dead tree in their yard or in their park or along a street. And we have to balance that with the assessed risk and the benefit that these trees provide. So it's a complicated decision, to say the least. Okay, I will get to some program level considerations here before our discussion. So one thing that I'm really excited about and hope to see more commonly done is monitoring tree pruning operations and nest encounters. So I think these pruning operations are obviously where we have the highest chance of running into the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, excuse me, or the Endangered Species Act or the Eagle Act. And this is a way to limit that exposure from kind of a selfish point of view and also to limit our impact on the birds. I think that's just the right thing to do. So creating a standardized process for pre-work inspection, our BMP, the Tree Care for Birds BMP, has a great outline on how to do this. Creating a stop work protocol when nests are encountered either during the inspection or during the work. Having a plan for a reinspection interval, coming back, finishing the work maybe after breeding season or after a wildlife biologist has given you the okay. These decisions are often out of our expertise as arborists to determine when a nest is active or not, and wildlife biologists should be who we partner with for that. So what might this look like? At Tree Care for Birds, we had a really cool opportunity 2 years ago to partner with West Coast arborists to analyze their pruning data for municipal trees in Southern California. They have a system already in place. So during their grid pruning cycles in municipalities in this area, they do pre-work inspections at every job site. And when they find an active nest, they report it. They delay maintenance until either after the nesting season. So again, that's February to August broadly in the Bay Area in California broadly. Or they enlist a wildlife biologist to come back and assess the nest, but they delay the maintenance and save those nests. They provided us with a huge data set, 300,000 trees pruned belonging to 180 different tree species. Of these 300,000 trees, around 1% of the time, 4,000 nests were reported. And this is pretty rare, right? 98, 99% of the time, they did not report a nest. They were able to complete the work, no problem. But 1% of the time, they encountered a nest and delayed work. And that sounds small until you start thinking at scale. This one company West Coast arborists, in a fraction of their service area, was able to save 1,000 nests every year. This was a 4-year data set, so 4,000 total over 4 years. 1,000 nests saved every year is a huge deal, and I think a really, really cool success study of what just simple monitoring and pre-inspection can do for us. We also looked at where nests were the most common. So we can see here some dots. They're a little hard to see against the green. So often these nests were clustered in areas of higher value habitat nearby. Here's Yorba Regional Park. There's plenty of water. There's mature trees nearby. So if you are managing landscapes like this, it may behoove you to come up with a similar program for pre-inspection and have a plan in place for managing these trees, in particular during the breeding season when you're more likely to encounter birds. But that's not to say we don't run into them in low value habitats. I would say this is even an atrocious value habitat. Almost every square inch of this area is paved. The trees are small, and yet we found a nest in this little tiny street tree up here. And on street view, we can see it's kind of a sorry little tree, but some bird was like, hey, this is my home. I'm going to raise my kids here, and this is perfect for me. So even during these routine pruning operations, it still is beneficial to have some sort of pre-work inspection to look out for nests. We also wanted to look at what individual trees may be best for nesting. Do they prefer small trees like this crepe myrtle, big trees like an evergreen ash in the center? Where do palms fit in? So we looked at the top 20 most commonly pruned tree species here, and figured out the rate at which nests were reported versus the total number of trees pruned, and that's on our vertical axis here on the left. What we noticed immediately is that not every species is equal. Things like our evergreen ash here, this third from the left, had pretty high odds. Around 5% of the time a nest was reported here. Our different phoenix species, our palms, also had pretty high odds. Our large pines, Platanus racemosa, our native sycamore. It seemed to me that these larger maturing species often were associated with more nests reported, which kind of makes sense with what we were talking about in the beginning, with more of these beneficial habitat features being present on large mature trees. Right, so this evergreen ash potentially on the left offers a whole ton of opportunities for different birds to find exactly what they want among these large and diversely structured branches. And palms are just kind of weird. They offer really unique habitat in their architecture. Through the trunk or through the pineapple, you often see cavities excavated in these cut petioles. The crown offers really unique habitat for larger birds or for birds that like to hang their nests off of the underside of the fronds. And things like owls even will instead of nesting in a cavity, nest on top of fronds underneath the skirts. So they're kind of weird trees, but they seemed to be associated with pretty high odds of a nest report. That being said, we can't assume that every evergreen ash looks like this one on the left. Obviously, there has to be some effect of the size of these individual trees. And when we looked at that, we saw the data supported this assumption. So this is the same reporting odds, right, of the nests versus total pruning events categorized by diameter class of trees along the horizontal axis. The larger trees were much more frequently reported as having a nest than the smaller trees. So the 31-inch big, cool trees more often had nests in them than the smaller ones. One thing that stuck out to me was this 0 to 6 category being pretty high, being higher than the, anything until 24 inches. And I think that stems from kind of two main ideas. One being that these trees have low branches on them that maybe aren't present on these larger trees. They've probably been pruned out already for sidewalk or street clearance. Many birds prefer these low branches, and it's possible that these are the only ones that offer those to them. It's also possible that it's a reporter bias. Through the Tree Care for Birds workshops, we usually use these small trees as training trees. They're easier to see the whole crown, and it's possible that the people were just more readily seeing nests in these trees. But I think this is really good evidence that these big trees are important. We briefly looked into native versus non-native. I marked our 3 species that are native to California. It's important to note that these are unlikely to be natively growing where they were in this inventory. They were street trees mostly. But as I'm sure nobody will be surprised on this call, the native trees were good for wildlife here. They were all pretty high in terms of the spread here in the bird nest reports. But what I think is a cool takeaway from this is that many non-native trees also seem to be valuable nesting habitat. So it seems to be more driven by the structure of the tree and the size of the trees than it was native or not, from what we saw. So through this process, WC has created a work process to avoid impacting 1,000 nests a year. And again, this is just in a small fraction of their service area. This is a huge success, and I'm like super excited about it. My question to you all, working in municipalities or nonprofits and things like that, is how could we implement something similar and try to ripple this effect out and kind of increase the spread of programs like this? So Tree Care for Birds is kicking off a partnership program to help people set up similar models. And we'd love to partner with you, either setting on one up or hearing from you if you're already doing something similar. We'd love to hear what worked, what hasn't, what have you. So I will briefly summarize this before we get to discussion. Again, features traditionally thought of as defects are often beneficial to wildlife. Older trees have many more of these features and are thus more valuable and worth protecting in our landscapes. As tree age and size increases and these benefit increases, risk also increases to people, property, and services. And a careful balance of risk benefit can be met to preserve these trees in our urban landscapes in a responsible way from both a safety point of view and an ecological point of view. And creative solutions already exist in our industry materials. I think as this topic gains traction, only more resources will start popping up and this will become even easier. Program level planning can improve habitat for wildlife, habitat quality at scale, and also limit your exposure to running into the protections of these birds and the potential penalties that you may face. And I think overall holistic management of these urban trees can improve the benefits for people and for birds, for the human and more than human world. So I'd just like to say thank you to UCFS for having me here today, to Hort Science Bartlett Consulting, Tree Care for Birds and Other Wildlife, and WCA. Here is my contact information if you'd like to get in touch with me following this. I'd love to chat about this, so yeah, feel free to reach out. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I loved your webinar and just hearing, yeah, getting a better understanding of why older trees are beneficial to wildlife and just understanding the complexities that develop as trees age. It really helped me just understand why they're so beneficial. So we have a couple of questions that have come through here. So starting with thinking about, well, a couple of random questions here. And again, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. So one of the first questions was from Sam Wright about energy companies being exempt from the MBTA. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. Um, I don't know if they're exempt. I know many utilities enlist wildlife biologists and figure out plans to work around that. But I don't know in too much more detail about exemptions.
Okay. And Daniel was asking about creating signage. Those are great examples of signage for habitat trees. Do you have any suggestions on developing that signage or how that came to be?
Yeah, sure. So one of those signs, the one on the left on the slide, is actually available for purchase if you don't want to get your own, make your own sign on the Western Chapter ISA's website. But I think the main goal with these signs is to communicate that these trees have been preserved for a reason. They've been looked at by a professional, and you have a plan for managing them over time. So I think this is really a cool way to engage your constituents or people who might be concerned about this tree. What I've seen be successful is having some detail on the sign and then maybe having a QR code to a more detailed plan or program structure. I don't think you want to weigh down the whole sign with all of that on there, but yeah, that's my main takeaway is like outlining that this tree has been left there for wildlife. This is how we assessed it, our priorities here, and you'll continue to monitor it over time.
Great. Darren, did you have a question?
I do. So, the snags really intrigue me because we have, being from the South, we have lots of really large trees that we have to take out. And so, my observation is that the, with snags, they don't tend to fall over. They tend to just rot in place, and create this kind of mound of decayed material at the bottom until it's just a pile of rotten chips. I think the public kind of thinks that those trees are a risk of falling over. Have you found that that's true there, or is that just kind of a regional anomaly?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an awesome point, Darren, and I think kind of speaks to a need for some industry guidance on how to manage these snags once they're created. I think often they do fall apart, just as you're saying, branches will lose strength over time and they'll break, the bark sloughs off, and it all kind of accumulates under the tree. But it's also important to think about what might have caused the tree to die. Here we have armillaria root rot fungus. If that's what killed the tree, the snag would be much more likely to fail at the roots than if it died from something else like drought, right? So if you have an idea of kind of what caused the tree to die or decline and understand the decay profile or how these trees of those species act in the landscape, you can create a much more detailed plan. But in general, I agree with you. They tend to fall apart in place. Once all the foliage is gone, there's not much wind loading that happens just on the bare branches, which is really what causes whole tree failure for the most part. So yeah, that's a great point, and I think points to a need for development of some more detailed materials on how to approach that decision.
Okay, cool.
Ryan, we've gotten a couple of questions about partnerships, specifically recommendations for private tree companies engaging with property owners, and then also partnerships for municipalities. Do you have any suggestions on how to partner with others to kind of advance habitat trees?
Yeah, yeah, I think that West Coast Arborist example is a really excellent example of a public-private partnership. So they have contracts through public municipalities to manage their trees, and they bring in this wildlife habitat guided management approach there. So it allows the municipalities to bring that into their program. They've anecdotally found a lot of their private property customers being really interested in this work. If they have a tree that they want work done and they figure out there's a bird in there, obviously they don't want the birds to be harmed on their property. So I think through contracted work, that's an opportunity for a private public partnership. Tree Care for Birds is also looking to kind of start this partnership development up with either private companies or municipalities. I think there is kind of a swelling of momentum now that we'd love to take advantage of and get some more partnerships set up.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions just about kind of connecting with experts or kind of other groups, specifically how connecting with wildlife biologists, or also how municipal arborists would talk to how they might approach a birding group or other experts like that. Do you have any suggestions on how to connect with people like that?
Yeah, definitely. So to find wildlife biologists, I found more success actually Googling consulting ecologists. For some reason, that just seems to return better results. Reaching out before you have a problem is a great way to do it too. Kind of having a list of wildlife biologists, a list of wildlife rehabilitation centers near where you work is also really crucial. Here in the Bay Area, we're lucky to have a bunch. Elsewhere in the country, it can be more difficult to find one. Reaching out to local groups like Audubon chapters, or whether they've been renamed like ours here to the Golden Gate Bird Alliance, is also a really cool place to start. At least in the Bay, they're always looking for speakers. They often have classes. I've talked to some folks through this chapter, and had some interesting conversations with people. I think it's yeah, there's plenty of different ways to find people who are interested in this, whether they be through tree people, tree networks, or just our allied groups.
Great. So everyone, I just put in the chat 2 links, one for our feedback survey. So love to hear about what you thought of our webinar and give us some suggestions for upcoming webinars. I also posted in the link in the chat the link for CEUs. And I think somebody was asking, Ben, you were asking about a recording. So you'll hear from me probably mid next week. I'll be sending out a follow-up email. And in that email, I will share the link to the video. So we did record this webinar and it will be available on our website. And I'll email it to you within the next week. We have a couple more questions coming. I don't know if you've seen anything in the chat, Darren, that just everyone's loving the photos in your
Yeah.
in your
All
presentation.
right. People love birds. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
easy.
I think
Get
that's
people
what it
excited.
And that's really a good place, if there's been a lot of questions about partnerships. So you always want to look for common ground, and the common ground is the birds or the bugs or whatever, whatever little critters. And so yeah, look for anyone who's involved in that, and you're likely to find some common ground and some good partners who can bring resources that we just don't have.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other. Did anyone, if I missed your question or something came up, feel free to come off mic and give a shout out. Just looking through the questions.
Everyone's being shy today.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Ryan. Thanks so much for brightening our day with some birds and trees. And thanks so much, Darren. And a shout out again to Bartlett for supporting our learning series. Next month, we will have Luana Vargas from ISA will be talking about urban forestry credentials, why they're important, how you can support your staff to become credentialed. So look for that. That'll get posted probably by the end of this week or early next week. And thank you guys. Thanks for everyone coming. I'm going to end this webinar and appreciate you joining us. I hope to see you again at the next one. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.